Hi, I'm Chris from Pivot, and today we're going to be installing the new Fox Live system on the Mach 5.5. Basically on the table we've got laid out what the Live system comes with. You've got your main wiring harness with a protective cover on it, battery pack, rear shock, fork that features a accelerometer sensor on the back of the arch, and then the wiring that activates the valve, and then last but not least, the rear accelerometer for the bike. So we've basically, the best way to start installing a Live system is really to start with a raw frame, nothing installed on it. This bike, kind of for ease of time, has already been assembled, and then most of the parts, some of the parts have been pulled off the bike. The Mach 5.5, if you're installing a bike that you already have built up and you're getting the system to put on, or if you're a shop installing the system fresh, you'll notice that the frame comes with rubberized covers on it that say Pivot. We've already removed those. On the underside of the shock tabs, there's another rubber cover that needs to be removed that exposes the opening for the wiring harness as well as the mount for the battery. So we've taken these small blue tubes. There's you can use the Park system. There's several ways to be able to route through the frame, but it found it easiest just to take the blue tubing here, and that allows us to quickly pull things through the frame. One of the biggest things with the rear sensor is that you want to pull the sensors all through before your rear brake is rounded on the bike. So on this one, we're going to start with the rear accelerometer, and this one, because it's the longest and actually winds up mounted inside the top tube where the connection is, needs to be done first. It's kind of the most difficult to do, so pretty easy. We pop this through the hole on the inside. I'm using doesn't take much effort to pull it through the frame. Just gonna go ahead and reconnect it to this one. And right now I've just pulled the routing through the bottom of the head tube. Ultimately, we're going to bring it out the same hole, the same port as the brake line, but for now it's just easiest to pull through the head tube. I've taken another piece of the blue line and routed it from underneath the shock tabs also out the head tube, so it makes it pretty easy for me to pull this all the way through, disconnect this blue line. I have another line running from the shock tab opening out the bottom of the head tube, and hook that up and just pull that through. This actually winds up being the biggest connector, so it's the most important one to hook up first. So once you have that, then disconnect the line. And I might actually just send some more of this line down here for the next route, and yeah, we're ready now to do the full wiring harness. This is what the system looks like without the cover on. Wires coming out the back. So it's actually pretty simple. The shortest one actually winds up in the top tube, so it goes to the rear sensor. That's where we're going to take this and plug it on in, and then make sure it's plug it in, make sure it's connected good. You get a nice solid connection. You don't want to have to go back in there later on. So, but it's pretty obvious when it clicks in, and it's got a good water seal and everything, nice solid snap. So I'm going to feed that back in first. That wiring, there's still plenty of wiring for me to pull spare wire out of the bottom of the head tube here, and then the next one I want to do is the one going to the rear shock. So this one's labeled rear shock, but the production ones might not be labeled that way, and if they are not, it is the second shortest one because it's going to come out the back of the shock tabs, wrap around, and plug into the rear shock. So fortunately I've already pre-routed a little blue tube here to get me all hooked up on that. This connector is a little tighter, so sometimes takes a little bit more force with these blue tubes that I'm using, but got it all plugged on there, and be able to feed it through and bring it out the back. This is worth checking out. So you've got two different kinds of connectors. One is for the actual fork sensor, and the other one is to connect to the live valve itself. And so one's activating the accelerometer and the other one is turning the valve on and off. It's kind of important when you route these. We're going to just take them out the bottom of the head tube for starters, but later on, if you send one out one side of the bike and one out the other side of the bike, you might be heading the long distance. So once these are pulled through, we'll be able to check later on and make sure do the final pull through on each side. But I like to just go ahead and get them all pulled through for starters. So I'm just going to go ahead and use this one to pull this through. So I pulled the one sensor through using the blue tube. I honestly did that to make things go smoother for the camera, but typically you can just feed them through by hand like that. When things go right, they go right. So feed all these wires up inside, and this nice harness just goes up in there. Take a 4mm Allen wrench, comes with a bolt to hold this in, and whole system just bolts down there. Just like anything, don't over tighten it. Too much is not just right in this case. Just kind of snug up, all nice and sealed up. So the next thing I like to do with the system is the Mach 5.5 comes with a bag of small parts. These little rubber grommets come along with it. They can finish sealing off the holes. So they've got a little split in them to go over the wiring. And looks like it'd be super easy to get in. Not always super easy to get in, but worth the fight. I like to take a little pick or a screwdriver, small flat blade screwdriver, and kind of work the edges until it, the lips of this thing until it pops on in. When it's in, it's in. I usually leave a little bit more wire out so that when I'm not pulling it out, so that when I'm getting the system finally set up, I'm pushing the wire in and making sure the pressure is put up against that to make sure that seal is good. This of course comes with a small Allen. Now the final system may or may not come with a small washer that goes behind this. Some instructions stating that you need a standoff so that this doesn't over tighten down. So same thing as the other end. This bolt should have Loctite on it, and you can just snug it up a little bit. Not too tight. All right, she's all in. I'm going to do the same thing on the underside of the shock tab, because it's backside of the shock tab actually, because it's just a hell of a lot easier to do it before you put the shock in. You got a little more room to operate. Snap in like that. Just wear some glasses would be nice. Some good readers. Oh, yay. There we got it, like a champ. So yeah, just left it a little long so it doesn't pop out when I'm working with it. All right, so next we're gonna install the rear shock. We're not gonna go through all of that completely on the video, but this is just a generally nice tip or trick if you're ever changing the shock on any of your pivot bikes, is to take a piece of foam, just put it on the down tube. That way if the shock falls, you're not taking a big chunk out of your paint right where everyone can see it. Not that I've ever done that before, but I've heard it's been done before. I've done it before. Got the spacers in, bottle of blue Loctite, putting some fresh Loctite on the threads. I always put the Loctite on the threads and not on the bolt threads themselves, because the Loctite will actually kind of push up against the bearing and form a little bit of a lip, which won't be super fun for getting everything out. So on this one, we've got an internal thread on the pin. Drop a little bit of Loctite in there. Make sure that baby never comes loose. Okay, so after you have the rear shock bolt properly torqued on this, I'm keeping this wire up and out of the way, pushing this back into place, and rotating this around. I had it twisted sideways so that it fits in there easy, but this gives me the clearance I need. Get this snugged up, torque it to the proper spec. Torque values are on all the bolts. So back here, same thing. If you ever have to put these together, it's good to just get the thread started on one side, then go to the other side, get the thread started on that side, and then tighten them both down to spec. If you tighten one down, it becomes immensely more difficult to get the other one lined up and started. All right, so now that we've got the whole shock installed, everything torqued down properly, we've got the Fox Live controller, power button, the 5 different settings, and the charger. So on this system, it comes with a protective cover. Take off that nice protective cover, and then I'm gonna take this off. You can see your nice pivot logo. Rotate this up, and you can see the pins and the pins, so you get this on correctly. Just kind of slides up in here, all nice and compact. That side clips in, that side clips in, secure, waterproof, and then you've still got this wiring. I didn't plug this in ahead of time just because I didn't want to get in the way of installing the box. Now, all the software and everything in the system is actually held in the computer, which is the wiring harness mount. But the battery is universal among bikes. So if you have a second battery, you could have that charged. The battery lasts a long time, but with a second battery, you could swap it between anybody's system. And if you have completely different settings on your bike versus another brand of bike, the batteries will still be interchangeable between different brands of bikes. However, all the software and what's specific to the Pivot Mach 5.5 resides in the wiring harness computer unit. The battery actually does serve as the port to download and upload any changes to the system. So you can't just take the battery, plug it into a laptop, and then plug it back in here. It has to be connected to the bike in order to do any kind of updates. The other part of this is we're going to go ahead and plug in the rear shock. The connectors here are they swivel. It's still a wire inside, so you don't want to spin them until you break wires off, but they do offer a bit of a range of adjustment. I'm going to go ahead and same thing as with that other wire that I plugged in. You'll hear a nice solid connection when you get it when you get it plugged in. And just feel it bottom out. We don't have it yet, but there is a clip that will hold the wire underneath and inside on this system, and so everything will be nice and tidy and out of the way. So now we're going to go to the front of the bike. We've got a bunch of wires hanging out. There's kind of a reason we hung the wires out. When we routed the wiring through inside, there was a kind of a big connector that sits in here, and that's also a lot of wires that are a little thicker than maybe a Di2 wire, but also not as rigid as what's on your housing. So that does have the possibility of, on downhills, of banging around a little bit inside the top tube. So when we install these systems, take a small piece of foam, and we're taking the foam and the wires, basically all the pieces that go into the top tube, and just putting it over the wires and sliding this whole setup. It's a piece of waterproof foam, so if you wash your bike and it gets up in there, it won't absorb water. And basically I'm pushing it all the way up in there to the I can't get it up in there any further, so it'll protect all that wiring, the connectors inside the foam. Everything's super quiet at that point. So now we've got two pieces hanging out, and we've got to decide which side they go out of the frame on. And so you've got your live fork. The longer gold connector is going to go to the sensor here. So this one, because this is on the left side, we're going to want to route this out the left side. The other sensor we're going to want to route out the right side. Lots of people have these little picks. This one's been bent a little bit more. Get a hook on it, and we've got plenty of room with your fingers and everything to move stuff around in here and get it in front of the right port. So I'm just hooking that, pulling that through like that. With the one on the drive side of this bike, normally when you build a pivot bike, this second port would be closed for a front derailleur, and the dropper normally comes out of here. But when you're doing a live valve install, we want to send the live valve wire and the dropper wire out of the same hole. The reason for this being, and of course unless you're running a front derailleur, then you can do that as well, but basically we have special caps that hold the derailleur housing and or the brake housing, and then a second wire. So we want to get these two running clean next to each other, and if you send it out this hole, then you've got one small wire coming up to this one. We can just get a cleaner route. Normally this wouldn't be in here yet, making it a little bit easier, but it's not really a problem anyway, because I can just put my finger up through here with this wire in my hand and hopefully pull it through. Just like that. Live valve actuator and your accelerometer wire both coming out the side. And then you've got some extra wires hanging out here, which we are going to later on kind of pull everything tight. Actually, not even later on. You can just pull it tight through here. One of the things we're going to do too is next is make sure that we have the brake line routed correctly as well, because after you install the live system and you go to put the brake line on, we don't want the live valve wiring, especially between the front and rear triangle, wrapping around the brake housing. It doesn't make for as clean an installation. So my goal is to get this live valve wire underneath the brake line. So so that's what we'll do next. So with the brakes, I went ahead of time and pre-routed another plastic tube, which is what we use to pull our brakes here. And you can see I made sure that this tube is on top of this line and this tube is on top of this line, so they're not wrapped around each other. It goes on through. We've cut our brake line, installed the little plug in it that comes with our pivot frames, and then we'll hook that to the line and get everything all plugged up and tightened up and ready to rock and roll. Just make sure that we have this sealed off so that you don't have any brake fluid going through the frames. Never good to have brake fluid running inside the frame, mineral oil or dot fluid, but of course dot fluid can be considerably more damaging to the frame than standard fluid. So as we get this here, you'll see I'm making sure that I keep that brake line on top of the live wire. Should have some Motley Crue live wire playing in the background during this. Be very helpful. Okay, not much chit chat in there. Brakes on. Before we put any caps on or anything, go ahead and at least loosely bolt this down. So we got the brake bolted down, and then we're going to start putting on some of the cable port caps so that we can so we know where the wiring is winding up before we do the front end of the bike. All right, so there's two kinds of cable port caps. The ones that come on your frame have a single groove on them. The ones that come in the accessory bag with the Mach 5.5, you can see there's a whole bunch of them that have two grooves on them. So when you're installing all of this, you just need to make sure that you, if there's a place where there's two wires, where the live system is, then you use this cap. In other places where there's just one wire, like where the brake enters the chainstay, we'll use this cap. I'm going to kind of go from back to front of the bike so we get the make sure the right amount of cable slack is everywhere. One of the cool things with the new XTR stuff is because this is on the inside and it's a swivel, you can actually crack these loose a little bit without having to do a full bleed, and you can get this angled down, and we can actually get a super clean straight path into the cable port. So on this side we're using the double cap. So we've got our threaded hole down here. Make sure get the threads locked in. Nice smooth install there. You can really easily over crank these caps to the point where those screws start to dig in, so you just want to tighten it down until everything's all so you just kind of feel that compression, feel the bolts start to dig into the plastic. Now we like on the brakes to there's a nice groove in here for the brakes. you want to not pull them too tight like this, because as the suspension cycles through its travel, it's going to yank this out anyway. So I always bring this down and kind of get it as a nice bow to it. On this one, before we get to that, I want to start and I actually want to pull this tight, because the cable came out of the top here, came down, and has the ability to kind of hang out the head tube. So if I put a little bit of tension on it and then feed it back in, then all the excess cables down here in the down tube, and it's not going to bunch up in the head tube area. So we'll get all of that tucked up in there. Fed it over, and we'll get a nice even. Later on, you can either tape these together or zip tie them together. Fox will supply some little clips. Kind of your choice on how integrated you want to make it. I like to tape them together personally. Okay, so I know this is a Fox Live install, but it's always good to just talk about any nice tech tips. So when we put in headset cups on the carbon frames, we always use anti-seize. Finish Line makes nice copper anti-seize. This is just another industrial anti-seize. The stuff is super messy, so just enough to coat the surface. It's not like grease where a little extra will help. You just want to have just enough here to get the headset cups in. No areas missed. So super important on carbon frames to just do one cup at a time. Snug that up. Bottom one done. Rock and roll. All right, we'll get the fork put in now. I usually like to coat the bearings with some waterproof grease before popping them all in. And get close here. All right, installed for now. Just snug everything up, get it close. And all these bolts, torque wrench is your friend when used correctly, so we'll just kind of get it going there for now. So we can get back to live routing and talking about the live system. So, as I mentioned before, we've got the wire coming now out of the drive side of the bike that is going to go to the actual fork and control the alive valve. Same thing, plugs in, has a nice solid click to it, and then on this side we're going to come on down, just plug this in here. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and kind of finish up putting pieces on the bike here, and then we'll get back to it and kind of see the final routing and cap installation on the frame. Okay, so here's the kind of the final build. A couple of things. We got the wires coming out of the cable port on the right side. We have a nice clean loop here. We want to make sure that this thing can go all the way around This does swivel, and under a hard hit this will pull out, but you don't want that happening on the trail or just laying your bike down in your car or whatnot. So nice to leave a nice curve here. Same thing here, we came up with brake line, have a little bit of extra here, a little bit extra here, and then cleanly going into the setup there into the cable port. And then yeah, everything's ready to go. So when you turn the system on, I can angle this up here, and the on button is close to the reservoir. You'll see lights light up. In this case, that means that we have 2 bars left. You can pretty much go several weeks without charging the battery. The battery charges with just a mini USB port on the side. You can plug it into an auxiliary cell phone charger. You could just in an Apple block, whatever. It'll just charge off a regular wall socket as well. So once the system is turned on, you then can press this button here, and this shows you that you are in the 3rd setting, which is kind of a medium all around, good climbing, good descending. The more you go, you hold this down and then you can click through. So 5 bars basically gives you the firmest setting, the most cross-country feel, and then back to 1, and that is the most open, the least amount of activeness from the system, turning on and off. And I like to keep it in the 2 or 3 range. So that'll give you the biggest difference of really the most dynamic ride in all conditions. And then when you finish your ride, if you don't turn the system off, just one click to turn that off on the on-off button, it flashes red. It'll turn itself off in an hour and a half. So, and to conserve battery. So that's about it. That's our installation of the Live. Like I said, there will be some few things with clips that'll be a little bit different on the production Live system, but for the most part, that's how you route the wires inside the Mach 5.5. And as you can see, the system's super clean, and it rides amazing.